Iran knows that it's at war with America. So they believe, I think, and with some justification on their part, that if we threaten America with war, America will back down, as it has always in the past.
This seems like a golden opportunity. If we're going to take out those nuclear facilities, and with Donald Trump back in office, this seems to be the time. The Iranian regime is once again threatening war against the United States. Iran's foreign minister told Al Jazeera today that if the United States launches an attack against Iran's nuclear facilities, it would be one of the biggest historical mistakes that the U.S. could make. He added that Iran would respond immediately and decisively to a strike on its nuke sites, which would cause an all-out war in the region. Very tough talk, but is this more bark than bite from a regime that's actually weaker than it has been in years? Joining us now to break it down is our good friend, Eliot Shookoff, Reserve Major in the Israel Defense Forces and host of the Conflict Uncovered podcast. Eliot, great to have you with us here. The perfect time to have you here. We've got these threats from Iran, of course, right. Things happening in Gaza we want to break down. But Eliot, first of all, Iran threatening war against the U.S., kind of typical bluster from the regime, but they're in a weakened position right now between their proxies being smashed, their air defenses being destroyed. Are they speaking from a position of weakness, do you think?
They are, but they're speaking in a weakness born of misunderstanding America for decades. Yeah. I think it's important to start with the fact that America and Iran have been at war since the early 1980s. Let's remember that Iran's agent, and as you know, we've discussed this in the past, Hezbollah is not a proxy of Iran, it's an agent, it's an actual extension of the Quds Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. They're the guys who blew up the American embassy in Beirut twice and the Marine barracks, killing 241 Marines in the deadliest day in Marine history since Iwo Jima.
1983.
Right?
Yeah.
So these are acts of war. And they have launched other acts along the way in the Gulf, by the Straits of Hormuz, now with the Houthis more recently, also, in this case, proxy agents.
Killing U.S. soldiers in Iraq repeatedly
also in
over
Iraq,
the years.
in Syria. Mm-hmm. So the war is on. Now, what's been strange about it, in my opinion, is that America has rejected the idea that it's at war with Iran. Iran knows that it's at war with America. So they believe, I think, and with some justification on their part, that if we threaten America with war, America will back down, as it has always in the past. Yeah. So I think that's part of what we're seeing. The other part of the fallacy of what they're saying about a regional war is that we already have a regional war in the Middle East. And so they're threatening to do what they've already been doing for the past well over a year, depending on where you want to start the timeline. But Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the militias, they themselves, I don't know what you'd call a regional war, but it looks like one to me.
Yeah.
So essentially what they're saying to America is, if you strike at us, we'll be at war, parenthetically, that we've been at for decades, and it's going to turn into a regional war, parenthetically, which we've been doing anyway for years.
Yeah.
Where's the threat?
Yeah. Actually, great point. And this all started really in 1979, the seizure of the U.S. Embassy by the Ayatollah's minions. But when we talk about those nuclear sites, Eliot, that's kind of their crown jewel. And now they've been exposed, their air defense is down, the proxies really weakened right now.
Yes.
This seems, and we've been talking about this a bunch on the show, this seems like a golden opportunity. If we're going to take out those nuclear facilities, and with Donald Trump back in office, this seems to be the time.
This would be the time. They're weakened, I would say more vulnerable than weakened. In other words, their capabilities are not so much reduced, although certainly Hezbollah very much so. But overall, I would say their capabilities not so much reduced as they've become vulnerable to attack that could be much more effective now that their air defense system has been destroyed by the Israeli Air Force. And that means that the likelihood of success goes up significantly in a strike against their nuclear capability, and the likelihood of loss in the process of that success goes down significantly. Unless one believes that the Iranians are going to wake up tomorrow morning and say, Western liberal democracy, how did I miss this? Don't put a lot of money on that one. Then now is the opportunity, because it's not going to get better than this. It's only going to get worse, if you will, as they rebuild, as the Russians send them more equipment, and so on. I don't think that that means a strike would not work, let's say, a year from now, but it'll take more with greater risk of loss along the way.
Yeah, it seems like there's a convergence of factors right now with Trump back in office and his maximum pressure campaign on Iran and working with Israel. This could be the time. I've said this is the year of reckoning, perhaps, for that nuclear program. More with Reserve Major for the Israel Defense Forces, Eliot Shookoff, after the break. Speaking of President Trump, what about this plan he's been floating out to relocate Gazans to places like Egypt and Jordan? We're going to break that down with Eliot. And he mentioned Russia, the Iran-Russia relationship, why we should be concerned. More with Eliot Shookoff after the break. Stick around.
Egypt's president and the King of Jordan have both said that they won't take in displaced people from Gaza like you suggested. Is there anything you can do to make them do that? I mean, tariffs against those countries, for example?
They will do it. They will do it.
What makes you say that?
They're going to do it. Okay? We do a lot for them, and they're going to do it.
Egypt and Jordan may be about to feel Donald Trump's powers of persuasion. We're here with current Reserve Major in the Israel Defense Forces, host of the Conflict Uncovered podcast, Eliot Shookoff. And Eliot, what do you think? You know, Trump clearly an outside-the-box thinker, and Gaza has been a terror hornet's nest really for centuries, certainly in recent decades. What do you think of this plan to perhaps relocate Gazans to Egypt, Jordan, and other Arab Muslim nations?
I think it's an interesting idea. It might have some success. Of course, he'll have to pressure Egypt, pressure Jordan. I think his chances of succeeding in Egypt are greater, partly because America has more leverage, but also because Egypt is an enormous country. So let's say, for argument's sake, 1 million Gazans are going to move. 1 million Gazans will not be felt tremendously in Egypt.
It's the largest Arab nation, most populous, I should say.
Most populous, and it's got a huge area. Where Jordan doesn't have that option. It's a much smaller country population-wise, with a large Palestinian majority already that is destabilizing the royal family. So they're less leverage, more pushback, more fear of destabilization, where in Egypt, I think there's a chance. Now, you also have to convince the Gazans. And obviously, we've seen over the past few days, Gazans who went to return to what had been their homes in Gaza City and Jabalia and the northern towns. Some of them are going back south. And a lot of that's been played up. I don't know, and I don't think anybody does at this point, what they're really thinking. How much pushback will there be from Hamas? In other words, they don't have to murder many people to shift that. And last but not least, how many? If there are 2 million Gazans, and I'm just using one of the numbers because there may be fewer than that. But if there are 2 million Gazans and 1 million leave, that hasn't solved the problem. Nice idea, interesting idea, maybe has something to it, but it's not one that I would put a huge amount of faith in terms of solving the issue.
Man, and it's a persistent thorn in Israel and really the world's side. Speaking of which...
It has been since Samson pulled down the temple, right?
Yes, it has. Philistia, the Philistines, that was Gaza, folks.
That's right.
Just a reminder, the Philistines were based in Gaza. Russia, Israel, speaking of Russia, Iran, I should say, speaking of persistent problems, just inking this 20-year agreement, Russia supplying Iran with fighter jets. Tell us more about that relationship, why we should be concerned.
Okay, first of all, I think it's important to realize that the whole issue around, it starts with Syria. starts in the chronological sense here. In the fall of the Assad regime, disrupts the Russian and the Iranian sort of hold in that region. And it improves or increases the Turkish one. Now, there's an imperial conflict that's been going on for centuries between the Russians, the Turks, and the Persians. The Turks made gains in that, and by nature now the other two, who are not natural allies, are thrown together as allies against the Turks. Russia wants to maintain its bases on the Mediterranean in Syria. Turkey is not so happy with that idea. Jolani, the erstwhile head of Syria, is open to talking. But for Russia, strengthening Iran is all part of that. If you throw Israel and America into the mix, there's that much more to it.
It's a combustible mix in the shifting sands of the Middle East. Thank God we have Eliot Shookoff to break it down. We will check you out, my friend, on the Conflict Uncovered podcast. Israel's enemies are America's enemies. So it seems like plain common sense that our two nations work together to defeat the likes of the Iranian regime and its proxies. Victoria Coates understands this very well. She worked as a deputy national security advisor for President Trump in his first administration and now serves as vice president of the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. She joined me recently to discuss her great new book, The Battle for the Jewish State: How Israel and America Can Win. Take a look. Victoria, great to have you with us. Hey, the subtitle of your book is How Israel and America Can Win. We obviously share enemies in the form of Iran and other bad actors in the Middle East. But for every American watching, Victoria, why should we care about what happens over there thousands of miles away in the Middle East? Why is Israel's fight, at the end of the day, our fight in many ways as well?
Well, Eric, great to be with you, and thanks for having me on. And I think that's really the critical question. And a lot of my what you might call more establishment colleagues in Washington, take umbrage at that question and say, well, of course, you have to support Israel. Don't be ignorant. I think it's a natural question for Americans to ask, why are we pouring, a lot of money over the last, particularly 50 years, but over a 70-year period into, a country in the Middle East? What do we get for it? What's the history of it? So that is one of the questions that I try to answer in the second chapter of the book, go through that, how Israel has developed, become such a powerful country. But also, I think the fact of the matter is that Israel's enemies, and you mentioned Iran, that is an important one, but also the international community that is reflexively anti-Israel, and forces here in the United States, particularly on our campuses that are anti-Israel, they are also anti-America. And they are going to use the same tools they're using right now to try to delegitimize Israel and make it into a pariah state. They will use those same tools, make no mistake about it, against the United States. This is their intended plan. And when they were protesting on the streets of Washington in July, the flags they dragged down in front of Union Station were not Israeli flags. Those were American flags. So this is an American problem, too. And that's really one of the primary reasons I wrote the book.
Yeah, it's a great one, Victoria, and great points all around. By the way, the Iranian regime refers to Israel as the little Satan. It's America that's the great Satan and the ultimate target in their eyes. Speaking of which, Victoria, and you dig into this a bit in the book, Iran's nuclear program. It seems right now, Iran, its ring of fire surrounding Israel has been weakened. Iran's air defenses have been destroyed. Donald Trump is back in office. The regime seems very vulnerable right now. Do you think we're approaching a moment of reckoning when it comes to Iran's nuclear program?
We may well be there. And actually, it was interesting. I was talking to an Israeli government colleague this morning, and we were talking about the great Satan, little Satan thing. And I said, well, we're both Satan in that equation. So we may as well make common cause. And I think with Iran, we've been watching this very closely from the Heritage Foundation. We know where the Iranian regime was in January of 2021 when President Trump left office. They had been really starved of funds due to the maximum pressure campaign, international isolation, and they had not had the money to pour into the nuclear program. And then we've tracked them over the last 4 years as the Biden administration stopped enforcing the sanctions, which remain in place. There's no reason. You just have to enforce them. But they didn't. And so Iran has been selling up to 1.75 million barrels a day of oil to China. They have been pouring that money into their military and into their nuclear program. Thousands of centrifuges, enriching uranium up to 60%, some say 80%, a week away from breakout. I mean, these are very dangerous times. And as you said, the Israelis destroyed a lot of the Iranian missile defense in their October strike. And I think maybe one of the most important things President Trump has done in the first week or so of his administration is announce he's sending the 2,000-pound bombs to Israel that the Biden administration had withheld. Even that's not something you're likely to use against Gaza. That's for a bigger target. So I think that's a pretty clear sign to the Iranians that this administration is serious.
Yeah, I've called it the Gathering Storm Coalition, Victoria. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, all working together against the interest of America, the free world, and Israel. Hey, again, the subtitle of the book is How Israel and America Can Win. Is a big part of that winning strategy peace through strength, which is something that seems to be back now that Donald Trump is back in office?
It is. It really gets back to the Reagan roots of the U.S.-Israel relationship. One thing that's not well known about President Reagan is how much he did to create that foundation. He established a memorandum of understanding on our security partnership. He established the intelligence sharing relationship, and then our first free trade agreement was signed with Israel. So these are all Reagan era legacies. But perhaps the most important was Reagan's commitment to missile defense and his strategic defense initiative. That is technology that was subsequently shared with Israel. Israel is a leader in missile defense systems to the extent that their proprietary Iron Dome system developed around 2010, a picture of which is on the cover of the Battle for the Jewish State. That is now what the name that President Trump is using for his comprehensive proposal for missile defense for the domestic United States. So it's a really important, wonderful relationship in that sphere.
Yeah, and it's an American Iron Dome that President Trump is suggesting. Hey, you dig into the Battle for the Jewish State. That's the name, folks, of the great new book. You can buy it Amazon, wherever books are sold right now. Be sure also to follow Victoria at the Heritage Foundation on X, across social media. She's doing great work. And also those shared Judeo-Christian, that heritage that America derives from Israel, the ties go very deep, and you break it down in the Battle for the Jewish State. Victoria, thanks again. Keep up the great work. God bless. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Eric. Go Birds.
Yes. Stakelbeck Tonight, my all-new nightly series on current events through a bold biblical lens. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching, and God bless.